Hi everybody, it's the Storycrafters. I'm Barry.
I'm Jerry.
We're real happy to be part of this Old Songs radio set here. The Old Songs Festival has quite a history for the two of us. In fact, it played a big part in our courtship. It was when we met and was around that time of year, and the Old Songs Festival was one of the places that we kind of chased each other around one fine day. But
it was 2 fine days.
There were other fine days, but that's a whole other story that we won't get into. But anyway, we've been going back ever since for various things, to perform, to hear the music, to see our son dancing with the Vanivers. We've been there a good number of times over the years.
And so when we met and we ended up connecting to tell stories, one of the stories that we found that we both had in common, a story that we both knew, is a story we're going to tell you shortly. It's a story that I heard from my dad growing up, and he told that to me, and I just never forgot it. It seared into my soul, and I carried it with me all through my life.
I didn't hear the story till I was an adult. I was living over in Europe at the time, and I heard it, and when I came back to the States and was practicing storytelling on my own, and Cherry and I met, and we were talking about what she's saying, looking for stories that we both knew. We talked about this one, and we realized, wow, we'd known it from entirely different times of our lives and places, and yet we both felt a real deep connection to it. So here it is. It's a Chinese story.
And there's also a Japanese version of it as well.
Mm-hmm. And we've been told there's also a Jewish version of it, although we've never seen it written down.
Yeah, that's one we've never found yet. And, and it would be lovely to find that. But, if anyone out there knows of the Jewish version of this story, do let us know.
But anyway, here's the story. It's a story about a monk who for his entire life had been searching for the answer to one question. And the question was this: what exactly was the difference between heaven and hell? And he'd done everything he could to find the answer. He'd read about it, he'd prayed about it, he'd meditated about it. He would ask people when he met them. He would say, what's the difference? And they would tell him, I think it's this. And then he would say, well, when was the last time you were there so you can prove it to me? Because he wanted to know 100% what was the difference. So for his entire life, he'd been searching for this answer. What was the difference between heaven and hell? And for his entire life, he'd never found the answer. Well, one day he was sitting in his cell in the monastery, and his back was to the door. He was staring at the wall. He was meditating on this question: what was the difference between heaven and hell? When all of a sudden, he felt a presence in the room behind him.
And before looking around, he knew that whoever it was not another monk. But he was rather surprised to discover who was there. It was an angel. And that angel stood over him, and the angel said, for your entire life, you have been searching for the answer to a single question. What is the difference between heaven and hell? I've been sent here today to show you. And then the angel turned and left the monk's cell.
Well, the monk wasn't going to let this angel get away. This was his one chance, as he saw it. So he stood up and he ran out of the cell into the hallway. But when he got out into the hallway, he was not standing in the hallway of the monastery. He found himself standing at one end of a long, seemingly endless hallway that just disappeared down off into the distance. And he could see the angel going further and further and further away from him down that hall.
So he followed that angel, and he walked for what felt like, was it minutes? Was it hours, days, or months? He could not tell, because time had lost all meaning in that seemingly endless hallway. But finally, the angel approached the end of the hallway and stopped in front of 2 doors. One door had a sign on it that said heaven, and the other door had a sign upon it that said hell. And the angel said, let's take a look at hell first.
Now, when the door to hell opened, the monk noticed something. The first thing that the monk noticed was a smell, but it was not a bad smell like some of you are probably expecting. It was actually a fabulous, delicious smell of a stew cooking in a pot. You know what it's like when you're in your house and your favorite food is cooking and the smell is all over the house and it's hard to concentrate on anything except eating that food? Well, that was what it was like for this monk. The smell of the stew just swept over him and he could think about nothing else but eating that stew.
And he looked around that room and he saw it. It was in a great big cauldron. It was, like the cauldron was cooking over an open fire, and the stew was bubbling over the top, and that bubbling stew would land in the fire, tss, 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 and that made the smell in that space all that more pungent and delectable. And then he looked around that room because he was about to step into it. And he noticed that there were people in there. Lots and lots and lots and lots of people. The room was filled with so many people. We will not see a room like that for maybe another year at this point. But it was that kind of a room. No 6-foot social distancing.
Not a chance.
And everybody in that room looked upset. Every single person in that room looked angry. Now, the monk couldn't understand how that could possibly be, since everybody in the room must have been eating that delicious, amazing, wonderful stew. And then he saw what was wrong. Every single person was grimacing, was angry, and he noticed that every single person also had metal bands strapped around their elbows and long-handled spoons strapped to the end of their fingers, so that no matter how many times they dipped their spoons into the stew, they could not bend their arms and get that delicious stew into their desperately hungry mouths.
Oh, it's frustrating.
And the angel said, "This is hell," and shut the door.
Then the angel went over to the door that said heaven and opened that door.
And the monk looked in that room.
And when the monk looked in the room into heaven, the first thing the monk noticed was that same smell. It was the stew cooking in the pot. It swept over him, and once again he could think about nothing but sinking his teeth into that stew.
And he gazed around that room, and there was the stew in the same kind of a pot, a cauldron over an open fire, and the delicious stew was bubbling out over the top and landing in the fire. Tss, tss, tss. And he was desperate to eat it. But that room, too, was filled to overflowing with people. And they also had metal bands around their elbows and long-handled spoons strapped to the end of their fingers. But in this room, everybody was smiling. Every single one of them looked happy. And at first the monk could not understand how that could be. But he waited and he watched, and that's when he saw. In this room, every single person there had learned to dip their spoons into the stew, turn, and feed the stew to each other. And the angel said, "And this is heaven."
And that's that story. We both loved that story, and we felt like the message of it was something that just again and again and again is important. And we often tell the story introducing it by saying, if you don't know this story, you'll find out why this is our favorite story. And if you do know this story, you'll be reminded as to why it's our favorite story.
And one of our favorite stories.
Sometimes
we
it's
have a
our
lot of
favorite. It's
stories.
true, yeah, because sometimes it changes. It changes. We've been telling stories since 1991. That was 1991, in fact, when we discovered that was a story that we both knew. And we've done a lot of stories and done things in a lot of different ways since then. One thing that we came upon sort of by accident was taking stories that everybody knows, traditional stories, because that's mostly what we work with: traditional tales, folk tales, fairy tales, mythologies, things like that.
Right. I mean, we do the occasional personal and family story as well. That's for sure. But
But
yeah.
the majority of what we do has always been in the traditional realm, the old songs of storytelling, I guess. And but some we discovered that we like to play with them and do different fun things with them. We were asked some years ago to tell stories at the Norman Rockwell Museum, and it was part of an exhibition of children's book illustrators, and they gave us a list of the stories that were going to be hanging on the wall and asked us to tell some of the stories that were hanging on the wall, and we said, sure, we'll do that. Then we looked at the list of stories, and we didn't really like any of the stories.
Not at all.
We had sort of cousin-related stories to some of the ones. We thought, well, we could do that, but we figured we should do at least one story that was up on the wall, and one of the ones that was listed was Rumpelstiltskin, which Jerry really dislikes as a story.
No, don't like that.
But we said, well, let's just play around with this. Let's see what would happen if we wrote a rap version of Rumpelstiltskin, and we did, and it turned out to be real popular, so we kept doing that.
And so we were able to be a little snarky about Rumpelstiltskin, but yet still tell the story. Well, we weren't terribly snarky,
but we got more snarky as we wrote more of them. We started to play around more and more and more, especially once Jerry took over the writing of them, because Jerry's writing head is pretty brilliant, and so she really took some big leaps, and this is one example of one of the big leaps that she took, and it's one that
really?
I think so, absolutely, I think so. Sure, I think, yeah, don't you think?
I don't know. I mean, maybe because we try to integrate two oral narrative forms in this. Maybe. So I guess in a way it's a leap-ish. Yeah.
It certainly does things that most of the traditional written down versions of this story don't do.
Oh, well, that's for sure. This story takes a big leap from the traditional. Yeah. Oh, in that sense, it totally leaps.
So you'll see what the story is as we go through it, and then you'll see what happens when we get to a certain point of the story. Anyway, here we go. A long time ago, when the gods were on top of Mount Olympus and Zeus was Big Papa, he stood up on high and said, it's all good. He made the creatures that would call the earth their hood.
He called for Prometheus, one of the Titan greats, and gave him a bag of godly traits.
He said that every creature must each get one,
and kicked back while his homie Promy got the job done.
But Prometheus had other things that he'd rather do.
So he told his baby brother Epimetheus to,
yo, take this bag and give out all the stuff. Everybody will like you, they will think you're tough.
Epimetheus gave Hare the gift of speed.
The deer got grace.
And the jackal got greed.
The sloth got sloth.
And the lion brawn.
And soon the bag was empty, the attributes were gone.
But humans had still not received their gift.
And when Prometheus heard, in a word, he was miffed, for he loved the humans, and he wanted them blessed with godly gifts, and wanted them to have the best.
So he flew to the sky, he went higher and higher, then he touched the sun and stole some fire. He gave it to humans for keeping warm and cooking food.
And when Zeus found out, he was in a bad mood. He grabbed a lightning bolt in a terrible fury, sparking radiation waves.
To be discovered by Madame Curie.
He tied his homie Promy to a rock, they say.
He forced a bird to eat his liver day after day.
In a rage, he called all the gods to his side. Behold, he said, Epimetheus' bride.
He raised his lightning bolt and flash. There stood a woman clad in bling with lots of panache.
Now you might be thinking she's a flash in the pan.
But there was nobody like her from Panama to Japan.
That woman stood there deadpan, a pantomiming deer.
A panorama of godly gifts would get her in gear.
Every god and goddess in the pantheon gave a trait. This babe would have no depreciation rate.
They gave her wit and wisdom,
love and humor,
sensitivity,
beauty,
music,
goodness,
and curiosity.
A plethora of flora,
Angora,
a fedora.
That mama had it all, so they named her Pandora.
When Epimetheus saw her, his eyes opened wide. She was one hot bride, so he brought her inside.
But she came with an attachment. It was a kind of box. It rattled, it was heavy, and it had no locks.
When Epimetheus saw it, he reached for the lid.
But Pandora disappeared behind a curtain and hid.
And the gods said, yo, Pandora really rocks, but you must never, ever, ever look inside that box.
If either of you ever flip that lid, the whole world's gonna suffer for what you did.
So take these gifts.
An opportunity knocks.
And never, ever, ever look look inside that box.
Pan and Epi were happy, even had new frocks.
They never, ever looked inside that box. They tried some Asian cooking like ox in woks, but they never, ever looked inside that box.
Then the gods called Epimetheus to work out of town.
He put the box in a corner and pulled the curtain down, and as he was packing up his togas and socks, he said,
Never, ever look inside that box. Epimetheus was gone for days, it is certain, and Pandora was careful to avoid that curtain. She tried Jewish culture, you know, bagels and lox,
but she never, ever looked inside that box.
She told herself that touching it would bring electric shocks,
but she never, ever looked inside that box.
The gift of curiosity made her fingers itch.
She developed a
That
twitch.
she come unhitched.
The box in the corner, it had no locks.
So you know what she did.
She looked inside the box, and when she looked in that box, all manner of evils swarmed out of that box.
Like hunger and sadness,
loneliness and war,
pain, arthritis, heart disease,
stomach viruses, coronaviruses, computer viruses,
acne, chickenpox,
cancer, AIDS,
racism, slavery,
being on hold,
pollution, poverty,
people who say huge,
natural disasters, trans fats,
bullies, cheaters,
litterbugs, tattletales,
bad manners, lions and tigers and bears, oh my,
fast food,
fast living,
fads, fashion models,
still on hold,
tabloids,
USA Today,
television commercials,
lawsuits, social media, athlete's foot,
guilt, greed, global warming.
We appreciate your business, please stay on hold.
Slackers,
hackers,
hijackers,
frogs, locusts, spoils,
slaying of the firstborn, cheap plastic junk,
PCBs,
thorough cultures,
prostate exams,
pap smears,
clocks ticking, alarm clocks ringing,
mean teachers,
more bullies,
not being picked for the team,
first day of school,
too much homework,
too much housework,
dust bunnies.
The party you wish to reach is on the other line. Please press 2
long
for the
car
voicemail
rides
box.
to appointments
Hurry
to
up,
lessons
come
to
on,
practices.
hurry
Move
up,
it
hurry
along.
up,
Let's
hurry
get
up.
going.
I'm not good enough.
I'm not good looking enough.
I'm not tall enough.
I'm not thin enough.
Advertising.
Telemarketing.
Junk mail.
Spam. Television.
Junk food. Spam.
Red eye number 2.
I'm not your friend anymore.
White supremacy. Zoom fatigue. Toilet paper hoarding.
The voicemail box is full.
Roadkill.
Road rage.
Airplane rage.
Religious rage. Slam!
And in desperation, Pandora closed that box and captured hope inside.
Ever since that day, the world has been filled with sadness,
madness,
and all kinds of ills.
And the root of all this evil is it as Zeus bid at the hand of Pandora, who opened up the lid?
The gods made Pandora.
Hey, they made the box.
They put in all the evils and they put on no locks.
And remember Prometheus, who stole that fire which upset the gods and sparked Zeus's ire?
Does it pay to lay blame at just one door?
Many hands make strife in myth, life, and war.
So instead, remember one heroic deed.
Pandora closed that box with just enough speed.
So when we're tussling with troubles and we just can't cope within our reach, thanks to her is the glow of hope. There you go, folks. That's a Pandora's Box wrap for you. We're the Storycrafters. I'm Barry.
I'm Jerry.
If you want to find out more about us, our website's www.storycrafters.com. That's the way to find us there on Facebook.
The Storycrafters is the Facebook, and then, well, on the website has all of the social media stuff.
Yeah, but we were delighted to be here on this radio version of Old Songs Festival, and we cannot wait to be back at the live one next year. We hope we'll see you there.
And in the meantime, we hope you all stay safe, and yeah, like that's what we got to do is stay safe.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right. You
Take
guys
care.
take care.
Enjoy your summers.
Thanks again. Bye, everybody.